Hey, welcome to the Cheap Air Gunner channel. I'm Cherokee Steve. What I wanted to post up was a video that I actually didn't get around to finishing, unfortunately. Ironically, my last video was about how impressed I was with my 2289 backpacker by Crosman. And one thought led to another, and what I was hoping was going to be the opening for this video was going to be this. So my curiosity has gotten the best of me as far as what exactly is my 2289, as powerful as it is. What is it capable of if it had an 18-inch barrel? So I think I'm going to disassemble the top half, the breech and barrel assembly, and remove the 14.5-inch barrel and do some investigation into exactly how I have the barrel port modified on this, and then make a decision on which one of the other two 18-inch barrels that I have that I'll go ahead and use on this. But I'm not going to bore you with a disassembly video. Just that's where I'm at, and with some luck, we'll see some increased velocities. So, unfortunately, my attempts at installing an 18-inch barrel on the backpacker 2289, which has a 14.5-inch Crosman barrel on it, didn't work out. First of all, as I stated in the little intro that I was hoping on using, I had to decide which 18-inch barrel I was going to use, because I have one on the KT HPA, and I also have one on the KT CO2. Well, because of the issues I had with the breech on the KT HPA, the breech in the barrel had already been removed from that particular gun. So I thought logically that was the way to go. I would use that 18-inch barrel and attempt to install it on my 2289 backpacker. So of course, the first step in the process was removing the 14.5-inch barrel from the 2289. Then I remembered something as I went to grab the 18-inch barrel that I just have laying around because it's already been removed from the KT HPA. That particular barrel was modified. The port in the barrel, in the area around the port, were already modified for that particular transfer port, which I used some plastic nylon waterline, refrigerator waterline tubing. I opened up, it has an opened up port and a very large chamfer around it for a nice seating surface for that, I guess it's Teflon tubing that I was using for that particular transfer port on the KT HPA. And what I have for a transfer port in the 2289 is a stock Crosman transfer port that I had opened up the ID on. But my first attempt at installing the 18-inch barrel, I figured I'd go ahead and give it a shot and retain the metal Crosman transfer port with the opened up ID. And unfortunately, it just wouldn't sit properly, given the large chamfer around the barrel port on the 18-inch barrel. So there was a lot of air loss. And of course, the way I found that out was by assembling everything and pumping it up, 40 pumps, and shooting it over my crony and getting a velocity in the low 600s. Now, in the last video where I was talking about how impressed I was shooting some Beeman 12.65 grain pellets. And 35 pumps, I was getting 744 feet per second. With 40 pumps, I hit 755 feet per second. So this was a huge drop-off with the 18-inch barrel on there and the stock Crosman transfer port. So I had to disassemble everything. And I figured I would remove the Crosman transfer port and the transfer port seal from the valve tube and cut some nylon tubing and make a transfer port specifically for the 2289. Well, again, as I have pointed out in previous videos that I made, it's really critical to get that Teflon tubing cut extremely straight and flat and to the right length. And it's just a trial and error process. So I believe I went through 3 different cuts, 3 different lengths, each one involving installing the tubing into the port, into the valve tube, reattaching the breech and the barrel, and shooting it over my crony, pumping 40 times, shooting it over the crony, getting a low velocity number, taking it all apart, recutting another nylon tubing transfer port, putting everything back together, pumping 40 times, shooting it over the crony. I just could not get the transfer port cut the way that it should so that there would be a nice seal. A lot of air was being lost prior to the air getting into the barrel, leaking out from a lack of a good seal between the transfer port and the barrel port. So after 3 attempts in getting low to mid 600 feet per second velocities, I simply told myself, put everything back together the way that it was. And I attempted to do that. I had a lot of problems getting the stock transfer port with the rubber seal that goes on the bottom of the transfer port and into the valve tube. Turned out to be a big pain. I did get it all back together, and I did get a velocity that was I was very happy with, extremely similar to what I had previously seen. This particular time I used 38 pumps, trying to go in between 35 and 40, and got a velocity of 742 feet per second with the Beeman 12.65 grain pellet. So, with all that being said, everything's back to the way that it was originally. 14.5-inch barrel, stock Crosman transfer port. One thing I did notice when I had it apart, I like to use these very small O-rings on the top portion of the transfer port. Really makes for a really nice seal. Let me show you what those look like. They come out of a disposable lighter, and you have to find the right type. And I believe I've explained this in a previous video. A Bic disposable lighter will not have this O-ring in it. I took a chance. They had some lighters at a gas station close to where I work that were extremely cheap, 50 cents a piece, and bought a few of them, took one apart, and saw that this particular disposable lighter did have this O-ring inside of it. Disassembled the rest, and literally for specifically getting that O-ring and having some on hand. Let me show you what those look like. Very small. These are the little disposable lighter O-rings. I keep them in this little case. Right now I've got 3 extras, but let me get one out and kind of give you an idea of how small they really are. So this is an example of that O-ring. But the O-ring that was installed on the top of the transfer port on the Crosman 2289 was split. So that did need to be replaced. So at least in this long, tedious, frustrating process of trying to install an 18-inch barrel on my 2289, I did replace it with obviously a good O-ring that wasn't split or broken. But it is something I feel really helps generate a nice seal, once again, between the top of a stock Crosman transfer port and the chamfer on the barrel port. So I'm going to do some more shooting, do some more testing with 35 and 40 pumps, and see if that velocity holds up in the mid 700 feet per second range, and do have some other things I'm looking forward to making videos on. Had a very generous, extremely nice contribution from one of my subscribers back in the day. Sent me what I'm calling a small sample pack of pellets that he has tried and it has had good luck with. One type is the H&N Silver Points. Somewhat long, pointed pellet. Those are 17.13 grain. He sent me some of these Crosman copper-coated pellets. 14.4 grain. Also, some of these RWS hobby pellets, extremely light. These are 11.9 grain. And the other ones, last but not least, are these Daisy pointed 22 caliber pellets. So I've got some more pellets to try out. Big thank you for doing that. That was just, you know, beyond generous of back in the day. Big thank you for that. And get to try some new pellets, see how they perform, and post up some videos regarding that. So I do want to apologize. There were a lot of things I wanted to touch on, and if the editing of this video isn't running in the order that I was hoping to get all these segments in, I apologize. But a couple of the things I wanted to show. Number one, those little O-rings. And my suggestion, there's a good way, if you do happen to come across some disposable lighters that have these small O-rings that work as really good seals for the top of the transfer port of a stock Crosman transfer port. If you do happen to find these and you decide you want to try one, installing them onto the top of the transfer port, I have some suggestions that will make it a lot easier. It has for me anyway. They're very small. They're much smaller in diameter than the OD of the transfer port. And I'm going to show a good way you can go about somewhat easily getting it onto there. The other thing I had happen that I also want to show, very frustrating, happens to a lot of us in our Crosman air guns, that little frickin' tiny breech screw that is underneath the bolt. I believe the first time I had the 2289 disassembled and was trying to get it reassembled, and I stripped out the head, the hex pattern on the top of the head of the bolt for the Allen wrench, and you go about drilling it out. And I'll get into what is involved with that as well. Hopefully it'll help if you come across these issues. So what I have here is a stock Crosman transfer port. It has been modified. The ID on this one has been opened up, much larger than stock. It's got the rubber seal on the bottom portion. The longer of the two sides is the bottom. That's going to be going down into your valve tube with this seal. But the trick here, as you can see, when I put the two side by side, there we go, getting this O-ring on the OD of this top part of the transfer port. As you can see, it's much smaller. If you go about trying to do this simply freehand with your fingers, you're going to drive yourself crazy. It just is, you know, not easy to grip this and get it stretched out to fit onto that. So, to make your life easy, if you're going to be using this type of O-ring as a seal on the top of the transfer port, what I do is I take an Allen wrench. Let's see if I can get, I don't have a size, but basically what you want is something as close to the diameter of the transfer tube. This one will actually almost perfectly sit inside the diameter I have the ID of the transfer port opened up to. What we're going to do is get this O-ring onto the end of this Allen wrench. Now that is not difficult because this is solid. So, as you can see, I have that little O-ring installed over the end of the Allen wrench. Now that's going to go inside the ID. I apologize for this being so poorly out of focus. But with this in there, using your fingernails, you can roll this O-ring off of the Allen wrench and onto the top OD of the transfer port. I'm not going to be able to get a good filming of this. You still have to be very patient. Rolling that O-ring off of the Allen wrench and onto the transfer port takes a lot of patience, working with your fingernails, getting it installed on the top of the transfer port. But now that little piece of rubber, that little O-ring, is going to provide a much better seal against the chamfer that goes around the port in the barrel. Trust me, I believe it makes a big difference. But that's what I use. And that's the technique that I use. Hope that helps. Over here is that little breech screw. As you can see, this is actually, believe it or not, this is actually the head of the screw. So you want to find a drill that's just slightly smaller than the diameter of the head of the screw. Now, because it has the stripped out hex pattern in the center of it, it makes for a nice follow for the drill. It will seat, the tip of the drill will seat down and stay centered in that stripped out hex pattern. You want to use light pressure. The first thing you're going to want to do is remove the back screw, the bigger screw on the back of the breech. So basically this is the only thing holding the breech down. Then very slowly, with light but firm pressure on the drill, go about drilling the head. You want to get down just to the point where the head meets the threaded portion of the bolt. You'll know because as soon as it reaches that point, the breech is going to give. It's going to come off. And basically, the vast majority of this broken part of the bolt, as you can see, this side of the bolt is the side that the head was attached to. The head will break loose from that. You'll have about 2 or 3 of these threads still protruding. And it's just enough for me in my needle nose pliers to get a grip to start turning that out. You don't want to go too deep with your drill, because then none of the threaded portion will be sticking out of your valve tube. You want some of that thread sticking out so you can grab it with some needle nose pliers and start turning it counterclockwise and getting it unscrewing out of the valve tube. So that's my suggestion as far as this goes. This is what I just got with a 40 pump shot. So it's not the 755, but it is up there at a pretty good velocity, 744. I'm going to try to do a couple of more. Pumping 40 times is somewhat tiring for me anyway. But it does sound like it's got a very nice, sharp, crisp pop when I pull the trigger, so it sounds good. Not like it did when the transfer port and the barrel port weren't sealed off at all. Another shot with 40 pumps, 745. So it's repeating very nicely. Okay, I tried 45 pumps. I got 758. That's a high. I'm pretty much done with pumping. The good thing is, downrange, looking at my target, it's hitting pretty much dead where I'm aiming. So there hasn't been any adjustment. Seems like the scope went back on and mounted pretty much exactly where it was at. Didn't have to make any adjustments up or down or side to side. But Beeman 12.65 grain pellet shooting at 758 feet per second. 45 pumps. So, a couple of quick things I just wanted to point out after getting that 758 reading. That was about 4 shots that I did, checking out the scope and velocities. Repeated very much in that 745 range. With it didn't matter if it was 38 or 45 pumps, or 38 or 40 pumps. That 745, 744, 745, consistently getting that particular reading. Just for the heck of it, the last shot I took, I pumped it 45 times and got that 758. So one thing I did notice with all of that pumping, it really was noticeable how much stiffer the pump arm had gotten. So it was basically opening up the pump arm, wiping down the linkage, and then reapplying a couple of drops of Pell Gun oil to the linkage on each side and opening it up fully and putting a couple of drops in here for the pump cup, and it immediately got so much easier to pump. I had probably should have done that much earlier and really made my life more difficult. So keep in mind, use it sparingly, but that Pelgan oil really comes in handy every now and again. You got to add it to your pump cup and your pump arm linkage. And don't forget, after 100 or so shots, put a drop on your bolt probe O-ring. That's another important thing. Forgot to mention, I do have something else on order. It is a 24-inch Crosman barrel. That was another reason for this 18-inch barrel on here experiment, which didn't work out. But I figured if I was going to have an extra 18-inch barrel, my goal, I guess, is to get that 24-inch barrel when I do get it, and I get the breech for the KT-HPA, is get that 24-inch barrel mounted on the KT-HPA. Was pushing in excess of 800 feet per second, and I wanted to see what that could increase to with the 24-inch barrel. Hopefully that all works out. I will have to modify the barrel port the same way I did on the 18-inch barrel that came with the KT package. And the other thing I want to keep in mind, eventually, and I don't know, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But as far as this goes, I still have on the KT CO2, still have an 18-inch barrel that I have not modified in any shape, way, or form. It's got the stock barrel port. It's got the stock chamfer on the barrel port. So, possibly sometime in the future, if I get that barrel removed from the KT CO2, open up the barrel port, but don't touch the chamfer at all, that would equal the same modifications that have been done to the barrel port on this 14.5-inch barrel. And I'm figuring, as long as that chamfer is the same as the stock chamfer, such as this is, and use a modified opened up ID stock Crosman transfer port, maybe this can get higher than 758. I don't know. I don't know if I really want to screw around with it, having gone through what I just went through. But maybe a future video. We'll see. But definitely a future video will include a 24-inch Crosman barrel. Okay? So, not on this. Kind of getting away from the fact that this is a really good backpacker. You can remove the shoulder stock. This whole thing will fit in the backpack that came with the gun. So, the bug out kit really makes a nice little bug out kit, but the longer and longer I get with this barrel, it's not going to fit in that backpack. So I also want to keep that in mind. So that's it. I think I said it before. I'll say it again. You guys stay safe, shoot safe. Another thing I forgot to mention, I just wanted to point out, in an earlier video I showed you the LED lights I switched over to with my chronograph. The triangular Harbor Freight ones, red plastic, has 3 different settings: red light, white light, and red sorry about that, red flashing light, which I just used the white LED light for the chronograph, have not had an error reading since using those lights. Wanted to point that out in case there's somebody's out there that has got the Caldwell ballistic chronograph, and if you're having issues with your indoor lighting, if that's where you do most of your velocity testing, is some indoor shooting, and you're getting a lot of error readings, underneath with a rubber band I fasten that Harbor Freight light to the underside of each shade, and as I said, no error readings. So that's a great thing.